The iPhone 7 might be the leakiest iPhone yet, in that we're seeing quite a few shots of the camera and antenna bands. The Galaxy S7 Edge does battle with the S6 Edge Plus and Note 5. Windows Phone users say goodbye to Here Maps, but maybe we'll get Spotify. And the camera on the Galaxy S7 is thoroughly reviewed. Another week of mobile technology news has passed, and we're going to talk about all of it. So make sure you're charged and ready for episode 192 of the Pocketnow Weekly. This weekly podcast is where we dissect and discuss those gadgets that make our lives mobile, that make our lives work. Smartphones, tablets, and wearables. It's all the stuff you wished existed when you were a kid getting picked last for the kickball team.
Oh.
Maybe that was just me. I didn't really come into my own until junior high. So, yeah. I'm Juan Carlos Bagnell, senior editor at Pocketnow.com, blasting the signal from sunny Southern California. Rounding out this week's techie trio, we're joined by chief news editor Stephen Shank in New Jersey. Good afternoon, sir.
Hey, how are things going?
And, of course, podcast producer Jules Wong will be frantically stitching away to keep this patchwork quilt of a show from tearing apart at the seams.
Oh, my.
I know. The time on the West Coast is 11 a.m. I'm doing it, man. I'm switching that over. I know you guys are all East Coast, but I'm going to start making the time calls from the West Coast. So I
use Atlantic time because I like to feel ahead of everyone. Go on, newbie.
I'm on GMT, so up your nose. There you go. So, Steven, we have some fun sponsor news to talk about, and
good.
just like last week, I think we can share in the sentiment that I like buying stuff.
Yeah, I mean, like getting stuff gratis is pretty nice, but when you have to make that, currency for product exchange, buying I think is the way to go.
You're not part of like an agrarian economy where bartering rules. No, you like. The representation of little zeros and ones or pieces of paper.
Yeah, currency, yes.
Yeah, I'm a fan. I'm a big fan. Mm-hmm. So, in buying stuff, I'm always on the lookout for a good deal. But, like last week, we were saying I'm not a huge fan of trying to dig up coupon codes. Not at all.
They garbage.
And it takes a really long time. Once you find a good coupon code, it's probably expired. I'm really trying not to slip into my infomercial voice here, like... Has this ever happened to you? And
I can't make spaghetti. What? This is so complicated.
How do hands work? So if only there was a way that a company could send me deals which was more like using an online dating service, right? Sales matched for me based on points of compatibility. That would be rad. So I'm a happily married guy, but I would totally swipe right on a sexy sale, right? So that's what Benjamin is looking to do. Benjamin works with big-name brands to find deals on products you might like, and then the app will learn about your shopping behavior. So it just won't start recommending cooking classes or surfing lessons if that's not your thing. So when you see a deal you want to jump on, you just swipe right on your phone, and it's yours. If you head over to benjaminapp.co/pocketnow, they've set up a special deals page just for our listeners, the listeners of this podcast, where you can get a handful of select deals like half off Spotify Premium, Hulu subscriptions for $3 a month, 25% off Starbucks gift cards. I actually did take advantage of that one because I'm fortunately a Java junkie and Starbucks are everywhere, and up to 50% off Ray-Ban sunglasses. Folks, it's all about the Benjamins, or more specifically, it's all about saving some of those Benjamins. Like you're in an action movie and you've got to defuse the bomb just in time to save your Benjamins. That's what this app is trying to do. So head over to benjaminapp.co/pocketnow to see all of those amazing, fantastic offers. And we want to thank them for sponsoring the show because that's how we're brought to you each week is through benefactors like Benjamin. So I'm glad to have them on board.
Hey, save some money, buy more smartphones. Very self-serving.
Right, well, and it's the right season for it because we've got a lot of news coming up on some iPhone 7 links, and of course we're smack dab in the middle of all of our reviews and comparisons for the Galaxy S7. G5 is right around the corner.
Yeah.
There are too many toys. There are not enough dollars in my bank account. So this is a pretty exciting times.
It's no good at all, man.
So before we get to the hilarity and the hijinks, Mr. Shank, would you be so kind as to explain to how people might get in touch with us for the show?
See, well, you can help fuel said hilarity and hijinks because
Yeah.
Juan and I will have some good fun ripping off each other here. But when you add yourself into that mix, there things just get more entertaining for everybody. So we definitely want to hear from you guys. There's a couple ways you can contribute to the Pocket Now Weekly. If you're watching us live, and we hope you are. Well, thank you for tuning in, and you can head over to the Q&A tab in your Google Hangouts there. Type up questions, comments on whatever's going on, what we're talking about, whatever you think we should be talking about that we're not for some reason, and we'll see what's popular. We'll read some of the best ones on the air, try to address them as best we can. We also have some listener mail. If you're listening to this podcast later on, you're not doing it live, you can always shoot us an email. podcast@pocketnow.com is the address for that. We're going to get to, I think, 3 listener mails later on in the program, but you think of something later on, you can shoot us an email. We'll do our best to address it on a future show. So either the Hangouts Q&A or podcast@pocketnow.com. One way or the other, we need to hear from you to make the show happen, so get on it.
Get on it. I mean, really, that's just good advice for life. Get on it. I'm amazed that, like, Reebok hasn't appropriated that as their new slogan.
Is Reebok still a company even?
I don't know. I run a tech podcast. I know not of these things like clothes and shoes.
Done with it. Yes, get on with it.
Thank you.
Although I am very well aware of Monty Python references, so I'm happy to see that. So we should probably jump into some news. How's about?
I want to talk about the Reebok pump.
Dude. The punk.
Jules is insisting we actually do smartphone news. Fine.
All right, so leading off with some device news from the week, I'm actually shocked to see the number of iPhone 7 leaks that have been hitting the market.
We haven't seen any iPhone 7 leaks.
You haven't seen what?
Well, I'm questioning the veracity of some of these.
Oh, yes. I think that's fair. That's absolutely always fair because we know Apple does a phenomenal job of keeping their products under wraps, which is why I'll be very surprised if these all turn out to be accurate or if these all turn out to be true for the upcoming iPhone 7. And we had 2 major stories that got a lot of comments and a lot of discussion on them: the dual camera sensors and the look of the redesigned antenna bands.
Yeah, now the dual camera sensors, this could be a real leak here. This we've seen a little component, 2 non-identical cameras. So whatever Apple might be up to here, it's not the same as what we saw on the, never remember this guy's, the Honor 6 Plus is the one with the dual identical cameras, which, we've seen a lot of like these. There's one good camera, there's one camera that does something else. HTC did it with its dual camera arrangement. I mean, even like LG has it on the V10 with those front facers there, where it's just, they're both good cameras. We have a regular one, and like a regular angle one, and a wide angle. So some companies really seem to be loving this idea of having 2 different cameras to sort of complement each other. That appears to be what Apple's going with here. We see a dual sensor package. A lot of close-ups of the actual component here. It doesn't tell us that much. We've heard there's a 12-megapixel main shooter, where the other one could be 12-megapixel with maybe some sort of optical zoom, or maybe it's artificially combining their outputs to do like a zoom-like effect. But this may be the real deal. And we don't know if this is going to be in every iPhone 7. There's been a lot of rumors suggesting this might be like a more premium one that could either be in the Plus, if we do get an iPhone Pro, because we hear that this iPad Pro branding is going to be continuing with the new tablet we're going to get. I think, is that next week already? Good Lord, that's not
It's coming up.
Yeah. So somewhere in the iPhone lineup, iPhone 7 lineup, this guy could appear.
Yeah, I always find this notion of dual camera sensors to be a really curious one. We've seen HTC play with depth of field tricks and background blur tricks. I think when it comes to photography purists, I know we have a couple people in the Q&A right now who are really into photography and especially mobile photography. Mm-hmm. It's always curious to me when we start looking at multiple sensors. One of the issues that we've got to solve with smartphones is just more sensor real estate. So there actually is a compelling argument to be made for using multiple smaller sensors instead of trying to fit one big one, larger sensor, because then you need a lot more glass. I mean, I don't think people understand the math involved, the ratios involved for crafting a really high quality lens that can fit over a larger image sensor. And so especially
also, you're going to want a physically thicker packing as you move to a larger sensor there.
Exactly. And I think you can look at like a mirrorless camera versus an old school DSLR. So you look at like a Canon, those lenses are really big and fat compared to something like a Micro Four Thirds camera where they don't have to cover as much sensor. So you can get away with a smaller lens. And I think we see the same issues happening with smartphones. You know, you can look at a Lumia 1020. It's a really big camera module on the back of that phone. And then you compare it to something like the iPhone, you see this teeny little dimple. So in moving forward with Apple potentially using dual camera sensors and seeing these modules which have uneven camera sensors, I'll be curious to see, like, maybe are we going to employ like a wide angle so you can capture a larger background for your image, and then maybe a narrower field of view that locks onto your subject and then pops them out like diorama style. You know, we could do some really interesting photo manipulations like that. But if we're not really addressing the actual camera components, like if those aren't getting better, I don't know that we'll see tremendous improvements just by adding more sensors.
Doesn't this seem really wasteful to you? I can understand if we had different sensors that were, I don't know, maybe like one mono sensor. I think there is a phone that does this just for like getting extra light sensitivity, or something that they actually were sampling the light differently, not just have like a different lens package hooked onto it. Just because we don't have an easy way to swap lenses on a smartphone, it just makes more sense to double up and waste all the space on multiple cameras. I wish we weren't seeing so much of that.
Well, and we have a lot of questions that need to be asked too, like with the duo camera sensor on the HTC One M8, the M8. It came at the expense of features like optical image stabilization. So it's really hard to develop separate camera sensors on the back of the phone which can coordinate in how they're going to minimize things like handshake. So I am happy to see that these modules all seem to be built, like camera sensors seem to be built into the same module, so that hopefully we see some of those issues ironed out, but there are still so many questions regarding how this is all going to go down. Moving on to other Apple leaks, though, it's been also very curious to see Apple's response to design. And so what we're looking at now is some potential early leaks as to what the next iPhone is going to look like and how those new antenna bands are going to be represented on the phone.
Yeah, we actually heard going back a while, I think the last year, this ideas that are floating around that the antenna bands that right now break up the back of phones like the iPhone 6 and the 6S would be going away somehow. Whether Apple was going to change the materials it used or just reposition the bands, we didn't know at the time. And then all of a sudden this week we start things off with a leak showing an engineering schematic, like a CAD program being run on. Everyone's freaking out. It's running on Windows operating system. How could an Apple product be designed on a Windows PC? Shouldn't it just melt the hard drive into the ground and, I don't know, sink down to the core of the earth? But yeah, we saw this design showing the antenna bands being kind of just like pushed out of the way. So moved down from their positions now, was an inch or so away from the phone's edge, all the way up to the edge, just smushed up there, bent in the process, sort of hugging the contours of the phone. It's interesting. I think it's believable enough, but it's the sort of thing you want to see confirmation for. So when we started getting confirmation straight away, this seemed really interesting. Except the first pic that showed these, it's one of these things where you do this long enough, you start to get a second sense of if these are fake or not. And I see this pic, and it looks wrong to my eyes. Now, I've been incorrect in my judgments, my harsh, quick initial reactions before, and I think I toned down the ferocity of that headline that accompanied the story a couple of times. Like, this super fake pic is super fake. It looks wrong, though. So the picture that got released here shows a supposed iPhone 7 with these redesigned bands on the top and bottom, showing a very boring-looking dual camera sensor on the back that seems to jut out really far to my eyes, and showing what appeers to be a smart connector down on the bottom back of the phone.
Yeah,
like
that one made me super skeptical. Yeah. Pogo pins on the back of an iPhone.
It didn't make sense. The placement didn't make a lot of sense. It didn't look right. I didn't get out and measure everything, but things didn't seem centered properly, which is usually a dead giveaway for a company as super intentional with its design as Apple is. It didn't look good. But then we got another one that like a very, very clean looking. This looks like a pic of actual hardware. And no, it is. It's not the iPhone 7. Meizu just like started waving its hands on social media like, "Hey guys, pay attention. We're a company too. We make phones. This is a Meizu phone." And sure enough, they gave us a render and it matches. Yeah, it's weird though that they seem to have the exact same band. That the placement is slightly different from this initial CAD leak here. It's a little bit further up onto the phone's back. I don't know if this should discredit the initial leak and like this is also someone added this Meizu element to a generic Apple template and is trying to pass it off as something new. I don't know if we should reevaluate the veracity of that, but it's all just really weird. I don't think we've seen an actual picture of this yet.
No, and you know, we probably won't get a good hands-on until we get a little closer to launch, especially from companies that start getting dummy shells for like case manufacturing and stuff like that. But I think it's interesting watching. I think we're very passionate about how our smartphones fit into our sense of style. And so over this last year, we've been seeing a lot of those criticisms between design elements which might have been influenced from other companies, this sort of leapfrogging back and forth between HTC antenna bands and Samsung's bottom edge panel, which looks
no, the 1A9's based on old HTC handsets, we swear.
No, really, for reals, man. And I've been super critical of the A9 because I feel there are other ways to make a slab of glass rectangle glowing screen and not have it look so much like a competing product.
I was at a dinner party last weekend and I had my OnePlus X out, which to my mind it doesn't really look that much like other smartphones. Yet everyone's like, "Oh my God, this looks just like the iPhone." It does not, in any stretch of the imagination. Just, I don't know what it is. People think everything looks like the iPhone.
Well, and I think, you know, for a number of consumers out there, obviously their experiences are going to be crafted by the devices that are commonly in their ecosystem, and so we start to kind of conflate very basic smartphone hardware with the things that we've experienced first. Right? You know, like I still kind of think so many phones look, you know, sort of function and look a lot like early Palm Pilots and stuff like that because those were my early experiences in using mobile touchscreen devices. And so I try not to get too persnickety with my less tech-savvy friends for making some of those comparisons. But you then have some standouts. Like if I pull out an LG V10 in a circle of friends, that is very clearly not influenced.
That don't look like nothing. Yeah.
In any way, shape, or form. I mean, and it's also very polarizing because it doesn't look similar to an iPhone or an HTC or a Samsung. It's extremely polarizing, and some people think it looks really cool, probably because it's a novel look, and some people think it looks terrible because it's a novel look. And so I wonder, I mean, like, do we think we'll see Apple stray far from their current design process, especially not maybe necessarily for the iPhone 7? I think we can safely say iPhone 7 will be continuing to follow in the Apple DNA that we understand.
Yeah.
But coming into an iPhone 8, there's every opportunity. Do we think Apple might actually start pushing the boundaries on their design implementation, or will it just be we moved the antenna band revolution?
Yeah, I don't know what else we might expect it to do. Move back to flat edges? I mean, this design's been evolving over the years now, and it's hard to think about where it could go next without it being some radical departure or step backwards. We're so used to seeing this. It's been even the big steps that the phone's made, when it's gotten larger, when it's changed the contours, it still seemed like this evolution of an Apple, the DNA, like you said. It's really difficult for me then to think about how could the next iPhone move past this while still being true to its roots.
So here's my prediction. I'm going to throw out this prediction, and I've mentioned this before on previous podcasts, but I'm going to explicitly state it here that not for iPhone 7, and probably not, if we continue this release structure, probably not for iPhone 7s, but by iPhone 8. We'll probably be utilizing an AMOLED screen, so I expect that there will be some kind of curve or wraparound edges. We know that Qualcomm and Apple have been experimenting with technology to fingerprint scan from the screen, so you don't have to
you're thinking about dropping the home button, aren't you?
Dropping the home button.
Yeah.
So we can finally start minimizing those ridiculous forehead and chin bezels.
I don't think that's so ridiculous, man.
I get cranky. Okay, so if we're really gonna nerd out, let's really nerd out.
Do it.
I get cranky when the screen to bezel ratio is under 70%. And so I hold the iPhone 6S, and it's just such a marvel. It's such a cute little phone, especially for my stumpy thumb little hobbit hands. But for a company that prides itself on an operating system which is designed to get out of the way of the user, iOS is all about you touch the app, and then that's what's on your screen, and that's what you're interacting with. You're not having to deal with any other part of the operating system or any of the background processes. I would want to have a larger window into that app than what's afforded me in the form factor of an iPhone 6S. And so that's, for whatever reason, I've sort of drawn that line at that 70% screen to body ratio. When we start creeping under that ratio, I get a little twitchy because there's so much phone that I'm looking at that is not dedicated to actually displaying the service that I'm trying to interact with. So that's my nerd confession of the week, and I'm glad you were all here to share it with me.
Oh, you need to get well, the problem is right now you're wasting all that space on the phone's back. You need to get who's the guy with the e-paper screen?
Yeah.
What is that called? That's what you need now. You're wasting all that space.
I can't remember what that's called, and someone's gonna school me in the comments, I'm sure.
Jules in like 3 seconds here.
But so moving on, and especially in talking about how our phones are put together, the leaks, the rumors, how they might be constructed, and some of the design influences that go into them. There was a story that I thought was a little interesting. It's not one of the bigger stories on our site, but something that I kind of wanted to dig into because I do think there's a little bit of a misconception in how we talk about smartphones and then the manufacturing process. How much are phones really worth, and how expensive should they be? And so there was a news report coming out that says that the Galaxy S7 is more expensive to make than the iPhone 6S, and a lot of people seem to be surprised by that.
I don't think it should be that surprising, just by nature of when this phone is coming out, how it's introducing a lot of these new components here. Yeah, with Apple phone, it's going to introduce things like Apple's latest SoC, but when these are coming from Apple itself, it can keep costs down. And we're not talking about a lot of money either. It's a difference of, what is it, like $50 here? Yeah, and it's an estimate based on tearing apart the GS7, looking at all the components in there, figuring out what it would cost a company like Samsung buying these in bulk, factoring in a little bit of overhead for actually assembling the hardware. And for the GS7 itself, not the Edge, we're talking about a bill of parts, bill of lading, bill of sale. Something. It should cost about $255 to make the Galaxy S7. This is if you had killer connections into industry sources for components. If you were able to manufacture things really, really efficiently, you could conceivably put together a GS7 equivalent for this kind of money. I think what you're getting to, Juan, is this is just a portion of the cost into actually bringing the Galaxy S7 to market. You have development costs, both on the software and hardware design stages. You have all the prototypes you have to make. You have software updates that you're going to have to build that cost in now to pay for their development in the future. You have marketing. You have licensing, both of software and of patents. There is a lot going into the end of sticker price of the phone than just the actual cost to put this piece of hardware together. Am I in the right ballpark here?
Oh, you totally nailed everything that I was going to say about this process. So it's always been troubling for me when someone tries to apply worth just by the bulk rate shopping of individual components for a phone. And when we look at something like the differences between even down to the sales units, can we expect Samsung to sell as many Galaxy S7s as Apple will sell iPhone 6Ss? And that's a really difficult question to answer. We know Samsung is the #2 manufacturer on the planet. They're the #1
It's got a
Android.
big family of phones.
But they've got a huge family of phones, so those parts lists don't get ordered in the same bulk quantities that Apple will. And we know that Tim Cook, as an operations guy, is amazing at walking into markets, walking into manufacturing situations, and negotiating phenomenal deals for Apple to keep their profit margins high. And I don't know that Samsung has quite the same level of skill in that regard. And then just to add to your list of topics about what gets actually built into a phone, we also have to factor in the costs of support. Apple has an amazing network of stores on the ground. Samsung is starting to get more boots on the ground. You'll see Samsung kiosks in Best Buy and in malls. There's a mall out here in the Valley which has this really wonderful, it's like an open air living room full of Samsung products. and you can kind of lounge and play with a tablet or poke around at a phone. Well, all of that costs money. And all of that has to be built into the sales of your devices.
I feel like, though, a lot of people are just upset by the disparity between this price that we're getting for the materials and the actual sticker price. They know there's going to be all these markups along the way, which should add, I don't know, 50, 75, 100% onto the original cost. It's nearly 3 times as much you pay for this phone as it costs to make. I think it's the fact that that gap is so big is what might make people a little upset when they see this sort of thing. If we were talking a phone that sold for $500, $600, it's a lot easier to swallow this sort of markup.
Well, but wouldn't we expect to see similar pricing disparities? Like maybe not to the tune of 3 times. 3 times the price difference between the parts list versus the finished product.
I'd be curious to see what something like the Nexus 5X or 6P cost to make.
Exactly what I was going to say. And do we expect that even though Nexus devices have been creeping up steadily in price, is there some subsidy happening from Google, or is Google expecting a lower profit margin so they're happy to cut into the potential profits to get more Nexus devices?
I feel like we heard in the past, and I may be making this up because it sounds like a good argument here. I feel like when LG was making the Nexus 4 and the Nexus 5, it talked about, there were rumors going around that it was selling this phone at cost, basically, because that was a really affordable phone at the time for the hardware you got there. And I believe, I may be wrong about this, I believe LG said, no, we're not just selling this at cost. We are making a profit on this, not a big one, certainly, but breaking even. So even at these low prices, you can still presumably pay for whatever little marketing Nexus phones had back then. But yeah, the other stuff, the development costs, the licensing, all of that, it's still possible to keep price down and make a profit. The question is, it's not clear to consumers all the time how much of the phone's end price is going to profit. And maybe if that were a little more transparent, we'd be a little less irked when we see breakdowns like this.
Well, and we also expect that Apple probably is working a higher profit margin than Samsung is for their devices.
Oh, sure. Oh, it's not in the breakdown here. But did you see what I posted the other day about? It was about Sony in this case.
I was just going to bring that up. That Sony is actually the most profitable handset manufacturer, which is interesting to me that they're going to be walking away from the flagship phone market.
Well, I mean, you don't have to sell flagship phones to keep on making a lot of profit here. I think the average price we saw for Samsung phones was like $450 or something, which you can do with mid-range devices.
Yeah.
But yes, Apple absolutely is making all the money it has because its average phone price is so very, very high.
Well, and also I think, especially in looking at this breakdown specifically, the Galaxy S7 versus the iPhone 6s, I think it's telling that for the first time in recent memory, we do see a clear that the Galaxy S7 is being priced clearly more than the competing iPhone. I can't remember a time where there would be as much of a disparity in price on Samsung side, where depending on carrier, isn't it something like a $20 to $50 difference for an S7 over a 6s?
Yeah, we should see if we can pull together any historical figures. See what this difference looked like in years past.
I'm gonna try and look that up, because I think too often we've had this notion of one of the major advantages of Android being that they can compete on price, that you get more stuff for less. But as Samsung has been criticized, was criticized. I think we criticized them quite a bit for the Galaxy S6 and some of the things that we lost in terms of lifestyle features. Well, we got all those back, and we still have a premium build quality, so it should make sense that we see that price point climb, all other things being equal.
Although, it's funny. I'm thinking about some of the things that, when you consider the amount of hardware you get for your money on Android, you look to some figures that are going to come in, individual hardware specs that can come in higher than Apple. Apple's still selling 16 gigabyte models, or maybe an Android flagship will start at 32 gigabytes. Android having more RAM generally in its flagships than Apple does. And while this, it's very true, when you look at the component cost, there's like no difference there. The difference between 16 and 32 gigs of RAM is, $1 or $2 on that component breakdown there. Same thing for RAM. So, yeah, you're getting more for your money, but only because we're used to paying more than these things are probably actually.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that's funny though that, because the economies of scale just sort of boggle the mind too, though. That when we say like, oh well, moving from 16 gigabytes of storage to 32 gigabytes of storage is going to be like $1 on that price point. And then also mentally calculating, oh, well, that's probably going to represent $50 million one way or the other.
Spread across the number of phones. Yeah.
and so that's absolutely so it was just one of those things I wanted to touch on, and this will probably be a topic that we revisit in the future. But I keep coming back to this notion of what would it take for me to actually build, because I'm pretty handy with a soldering iron. What would it take for me to build a phone that I would confidently walk around with and not expect that it would just explode if I ever dropped it or, sat on it or something like that, and had the same reliability, the same network system of support, the same wealth of accessories to partake with, and would that even be feasible for me to do anywhere near the price point of a mass market or mass produced phone? And the situation in my brain just sort of doesn't match up with the angst that we see when people complain, like, oh, it only costs them like $100 and a half a ham sandwich to make this phone. Why do they charge like $700? You're like,
it's funny you mentioned that. Did you ever see the thing where the guy like makes a sandwich from scratch? And by making a sandwich from scratch, I mean like he grows wheat, he makes bread, he like raises a pig and slaughters it.
It's so labor intensive.
$700 for this sandwich in the end.
If you want to bake a pie from scratch, step 1, create the universe.
Yeah.
So we do have a pair of Galaxy S7 stories that we're going to talk about. First of all, our illustrious Pocketnow daily producer, the daily cousin or sibling, I should say, to our weekly podcast, he did a great sit-down comparison between the Galaxy S7 Edge, the Galaxy S6 Edge Plus, and the Galaxy Note 5. I have to say that so slowly because there are so many Galaxies and S's and numbers that it's very easy for me to trip all that up.
Yeah.
It's pretty scary stuff. But one of the first questions, and I want to throw this one out to you, Stephen, one of the first questions that we get in looking at this kind of comparison is, do we need to redefine what a phablet is? What screen size do we start the phablet moniker at? Because 5.5 has been listed for flagship phones, and it seems that the S7 Edge is a better comparison against larger screen devices at 5.7 and bigger.
I don't like the idea that phablet is somehow dictated by what the popular phone size is at the moment, and the phablet is somehow larger than your regular phone. No. I'm going to be a purist here. Phablet is larger than 5 inches. You got a 5.2-inch phone? Oh, that's very nice for you. You're using a phablet. Deal with it. Remember, this got started with I think it was the Dell Streak back in the day. Like the first 5-incher. It didn't even have a cellular radio, I don't think. It's like a media consumption thing. That started the whole phablet thing, and that was a 5. I'm not going to say a 5-incher now is a phablet, but larger than that, I don't. Okay, I could be compelled to say 5.5, but everything Note is a phablet. Everything, the S7 Edge is a phablet now. I'm sorry, guys. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with a phablet. They're very, very. It's hip, I think.
So I'm gonna say because I very much agree with this sentiment. But having used phones like the LG G4, where that 5.5-inch screen does a pretty good job of sort of minimizing the amount of phone around it, so that it can
keeps it tight.
Be used reasonably well one-handed. Keeps it tight, I think what we could see is an overlap. So we have a little Venn diagram of smartphones, flagship smartphones, phablet smartphones, and then maybe what actually determines that difference is, are there pieces of software on the phone which actually seek to utilize additional screen real estate in a novel way? I think Samsung probably still has the best arguments for larger screen devices in general, as opposed to other companies trying to do things to minimize the extra. I mean, like, I look at the iPhone 6s Plus, and a lot of the additional customizations that we see tend to be things that help minimize the impact of having a bigger screen, but I don't see a lot that actually takes it
Okay, I'm back. I'm back. Well, something happened wrong with our broadcast there, folks. Thank you for sticking with us if you have. And there's Juan. We're all coming back now.
Whoa, what happened there?
I don't. It's Google Hangouts, man.
Wow, that was great. I don't even know where I got cut off there. So whatever point I was trying to make, thanks Google Hangouts for nothing. Let me get my lower third back up. But
Tablets.
but ultimately, so I look at something like the S7 Edge and really does make a compelling argument that it is a phablet. The additional Edge software is providing additional benefit and additional services that we wouldn't normally get on some smaller phones. I mean, not necessarily Samsung's, but other smaller devices. And at 5.5 inches, we're not too far removed from what we have on offer from the S6 Edge Plus.
I wonder, though, if the question we should be asking is more about what impact this device has on what else you carry around. Because I think the idea of a phablet has always been it's a device that can stand in. It has supportable as a phone. It has voice stuff, but it stands in place of a tablet. So you don't also need to carry around a tablet. With a 5-inch phone, I still, when I'm traveling, carry around a tablet with me because I want to watch some video on there. I want to read something on a larger screen. At what point do you not need to carry around that separate tablet? And I don't know if we've reached that yet. Would you like? Well, first, I guess the question: do you carry a tablet? And if you were carrying the S7 Edge, would you not?
So for me personally, to answer that question, it was the Lumia 1520 that absolutely destroyed my desire to ever carry around a mini tablet. So before then, I was a huge Nexus 7 fan. I friggin' loved that little slate. It was awesome. I wrote so much on that with a little Bluetooth keyboard.
Yeah.
It was a great portable device. And then the 1520 came out, and with the exception of some screen real estate, it did everything better than the Nexus 7 did. Better camera, it had a brighter screen. At the time, it was one of the few ways that I could properly interact with Microsoft Word, which I was in a really Microsoft Office-heavy working environment at the time. And so since then, tablets have been sort of pushed to the side for me as more entertainment and consumption devices. And I get most of my content creation done now on phones, especially on airplanes. I get the little Microsoft portable Bluetooth flip fold keyboard and my phone, and I can work so much easier in a cramped space as I'm usually flying in the middle seat because I'm cheap.
There you go.
I can get so much more work done there, and I don't have to do that big, heavy sigh eye roll when someone needs to go to the bathroom. You just go, and your little writing platform.
Bless your heart.
But getting into the actual comparison, so Jaime went through and did a whole bunch of showdowns. He did gaming comparisons. He did hardware comparisons, and I think this is really interesting. I think one of the things that I think is curious. I started that sentence 3 times and I still haven't gotten to the point. What I think is really curious is Samsung in a position where Apple was when they had to shift up the iPad release date. Remember, we got the iPad 3, and then we got
6 months later. Yeah,
and it was really, really short, and we got another iPad, and people felt a little frustrated by that.
That's right. They should.
Is Samsung in danger of the same kind of frustration now that we have the S6 Edge Plus out on one side of the market, and the S7 competes very well across a number of the same usage scenarios?
Yeah, that's a really fair concern there. I'm sure there are a lot of people who bought that last fall and are kind of kicking themselves. Then again, they probably should have known. I mean, we knew that a Galaxy S7 was coming. That there would be a size disparity between the S7 and the S7 Edge, that's kind of a new development.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Oh, I feel bad for them now.
So this is one of those things, like we're all geeks here. If you're watching this podcast, you're probably a little tech savvier than the average bear. We would have an expectation that a new Galaxy is coming out. So if you're looking at shopping a phone in December, we're probably a little more likely to hold off and at least wait until MWC to see what gets announced.
Right.
But general consumers, do we expect that they'll be that up to date? You're looking at shopping a phone and you get the S6 Edge Plus because it's a beautifully designed phone. It is one of the most attractive phones I think has ever been released. And then let's say you get that in January, and then 2 months later, this S7 Edge is released, comes out, has micro SD card expansion, has a supposedly better camera, is more powerful, it's better because it's the newer one, and it comes out at a lower price point. than the S6 Edge Plus was released at.
That's tough stuff.
It's tough stuff. And where do we place an expectation on consumers being aware that those differences are relevant or those differences exist?
Honestly, though, I feel like we're seeing new phones come out at such a rapid pace now. And Sony, as you know, backing away from the Xperia Z line, isn't going to be doing this anymore. But when it was coming out with a new flagship every 6, 8, 10 months there, it sort of forced us to start reconsidering, how long should we expect to have the latest and greatest before there is something new. And there's always going to be something else just around the corner. I kind of hate it when people ask me, what phone should I get? Like, oh, we can get these now. But I know about this really great phone coming out in another couple of months, and there's always going to be some other phone in another couple of months. Especially
at some point, you have to get off the train.
Yeah, if we stop focusing just on Samsung too, well, you could get the S6, the Edge now, but if you waited 6 months, there'd be all these other phablets from these other companies. Okay, there's not that many phablets out there in the Android world now that are the same caliber, but you know what I'm saying.
I'm hip to your jive. I know the truth of which you speak, fam.
Word.
Yup. No, but it's definitely an interesting look at this situation as we are seeing those overlaps. When you're looking at a Note 5 versus the S7 Edge. Man, those numbers and letters are going to mess me up. I know I'm going to say them wrong.
It all gets blends together.
And so when you start comparing those, one of the interesting things for me, and we can use this as sort of a loose segue into talking about the regular Galaxy S7, not the larger S7 Edge. One of the interesting things to me has been looking at just those little differences and those little tweaks in performance. So for me, the S7... around the user interface, around the UI, paging through your home screens, loading up social media apps and social networking apps. I don't know that I'd really be able to see much of a difference between those two phones. But in some of the more aggressive games that I play, the Note 5 with an Exynos processor does seem to be subtly outperforming the Qualcomm 820 on the newer, supposedly more powerful phone.
That's very interesting.
And so I think we really are sort of, again, in a situation where those improvements to things like processor tech are going to be getting finer and finer. It's not going to be just a one-size-fits-all. It's a newer processor, so everything across the board is better. It's going to be like, well, if I really care about gaming, maybe a Note 5, if I have to buy a phone today, maybe a Note 5 really is the better way to go.
Yeah, despite I hate to say advanced age, but let's face it, there'll be a new Note here sooner than there was the old Note arriving.
Right, we're definitely at that stage in the year where the amount of time I would have to wait for a Note 6 would make it not an option if I had to buy a phone in the next 2 months. So I think that's really curious of watching all of that go down, because and like I said, we can move and talk about the Galaxy S7 camera now, because we're not seeing revolution. We're obviously seeing iteration. We're seeing evolution. We are seeing improvements, but to what degree, and how do we keep justifying $700 phones for especially for those of us who like to be on the bleeding edge? If I really like to be on the bleeding edge, and if I've got a Galaxy S6 and I check out a Galaxy S7. How much difference am I really going to be paying for that new phone?
It's not just about the actual improvement you get there in the phone. You want something newer. Your phone's been around for a year now. Probably has a few dings and scratches here and there. You want the security if nobody's going to have software updates for a certain period of time going forward. I mean, you just want the recognition for having the latest and greatest phone. Someone says, "Oh, I saw that in the ad. I
am very smartphone vain. This is true."
Yeah, I mean, it's not just the actual phone you're paying for here. And I think this is why we've seen a lot of carriers get success now with new leasing programs offering to make sure you always have the newest phone. So you don't have to think so much about, I'm going to have to sell this now or upgrade. No, you might have to pay a little bit more, but you're in a program where you're shelling out a certain amount every month, and when that new phone arrives, you're going to have it. You don't have to worry about it. I think that peace of mind also is really valuable to shoppers.
No, actually, those are excellent points. I hadn't really considered some of the more lifestyle aspects of owning a newer smartphone, but it is just sort of an interesting topic, especially for those of us who get into like spec wars and debates, and if we're still paying attention to benchmarks and things like that, where the the costs that go into a new phone for having the latest and greatest smartphone, I don't think are always going to be reflected in just raw performance numbers. I think we're going to see sort of lateral moves, sideways moves from just pure performance to things like this new camera tech. So, Stephen, have you had a chance to play with the Galaxy S7 yet?
No, I have not.
Okay, so I'm gonna try and work out with our bosses and stuff, especially if I get to spend any significant time with the LG G5, because I think you'll be really, I think you'll enjoy what the S7 brings to the table.
I would hope so.
For previous conversations and stuff, but I got to spend some time with the Galaxy S7 camera, and it was a very interesting experience.
Qualify interesting.
So first off, I'm just gonna. I mean, Jules was kind enough to throw up. This is from the video review that we produced, and so if you're watching this on the YouTubes, you're seeing some of the footage and some of the stills that I captured with the Galaxy S7 camera, shot for 3 days with the S7 in a variety of conditions: bright outdoor California sun, shaded conditions, low light, indoor, nighttime photography, and this exactly showcases some of the issues that we were talking about with the Galaxy S7 Edge versus the Galaxy S6 Edge Plus. Samsung made a concerted effort to focus on a couple individual performance issues, things like low light photography. So this isn't a radically better camera. This isn't a huge improvement over what we saw on the Note 5 or the Galaxy S6. It's kind of a lateral move. We're focused on different aspects of photography, not can we make one camera that's universally better under all situations or all circumstances. And so with things like we have a larger aperture, you're going to hear a lot of people talk about the hole that lets in the light for the lens. Well, that's great for low light and indoor shots, right? You want to be able to soak up as much light as quickly as you can, but it might not be good for macro shooters. So for people like me who really do enjoy getting super up close to your subject, sometimes that introduces softness or blurriness to your photos because your depth of field is so razor thin. And so this was a very eye-opening experience in seeing what a company could do to really focus in on specific aspects. But every time you focus in on some specific aspects, you have to expect that there are going to be compromises elsewhere in the chain. You know, we wouldn't be able to have everything unless we had phones that were the size of DSLRs.
I'm okay with that.
I mean, me personally, I am okay with that too. Yeah. But we also have sort of an expectation that smartphones will occasionally fit into your pockets, depending on how small your pockets are.
That's what holsters are for, man. Come on, get wise.
Or like a really good yeah, it's my phone. You can like Dirty Harry because it's a smartphone.
Sure, why not?
Terrible for the audio version of this podcast because that was all done with mine. And
no more pantomime.
No more pantomime. So we do have the absolute most in-depth look at the Galaxy S7 camera available on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Pocketnow. If you really want to get into the nitty-gritty, if you really care about mobile content creation, what this thing has to offer, I would highly recommend checking it out. Of course you do. I'm going to keep saying this over and over and over again, and people are going to hate every time I say it. But we live in an age where the only camera someone might own is the one bolted to the back of their phone. And if you're really going to trust these devices to capture the memories that you feel are important, to engage with the content production that you enjoy, you know, the styles of photography, the styles of photos that you like to shoot, I think it behooves you to know what the pros and cons for those various cameras might be. And the only way for us to do that is to produce crazy long videos with tons of content and tons of samples so that you can see how these things actually perform in real life.
It's going to be that, and it's going to be the backup camera you have above your license plate. Those are the cameras that are going to be in your life. We're going to start reviewing those too. You back right up to your subject.
I should give that a shot because the backup camera on my little Nissan is terrible. So that could be a lot of fun trying to land like screenshots of that little screen as I pull up super close to a flower and nail the macro. Excellent.
Nice.
So I'm just going to throw that up there right there because that's from the selfie too. So anyway, moving right along. Before we get into some of the other development news throughout the week, we have some Q&As that we want to touch on right quick. And A number one, because this was big news this morning before we had a chance to put this show together, from Paul Bond. Paul Bond. Did Juan get the Windows 10 mobile that supposedly came out today? So updates are finally starting to arrive.
Hooray!
For our various older Lumias. The Lumia's running Windows 8, 8.1, and we're finally starting to see those Windows 10 updates trickle out. Sadly, Paul, I am...
Oh no, what happened?
None of my Windows 8 phones are charged.
Oh.
So I have a Lumia 1520 under this desk, plugged in.
It's like holding up the wobbly leg.
No, not that bad. I love my 1520. Maybe my 830 might be holding up a stack of phone books or something.
Whoops.
So I went to fire it up like, oh cool, it's here, and let me plug it in because I knew it wasn't charged, and it was so depleted that all I had was the little flashing Windows icon from the home button.
But you're charging it up now.
I'm charging it up now, so we are going to take a look at that performance. It has been a very difficult transition, I think, for Microsoft moving from Windows 8 to Windows 10. So I'm really curious to see how this update performs, the official release, because I've been playing with some of the preview builds, obviously. Right. But I'm really curious to see how the official release is actually going to perform on older hardware.
And I like that Microsoft sort of owned up to the fact that we tried really hard to make this work as many devices as we could. We released insider test builds for a ton of hardware out there, and some of the times those test builds just didn't give us the sort of performance we were looking for, and we're not going to release the public updates for these devices now. Presumably you can keep testing insider releases if you definitely want to have Windows 10 on there, even if the experience is a little rough around the edges. But yeah, so not every Windows Phone 8.
Did it again.
That's fun. This is a good weekly. We're having an okay time here.
This is going to be great. And Jules, I'll try and help you out with editing the audio version of this if you need it, so that we can avoid some of these other shenanigans.
Thank you for sticking with us, everyone, despite these
we appreciate it, especially considering the 370 or so odd of you that are still on board for this. We appreciate your patience, and I'll be sending a strongly worded email to Google.
Shake harder, boy.
I'm not going to do that. I'm sorry. That's a lie. But we'll figure this out. So I'm going to get my little banner back up. And you were in the middle of making probably a very salient point about...
something about Windows Phone updates. Getting kicked off of Hangouts immediately knocks me off my train of thought here. We're not going to get them for every single device. Microsoft posted a list of those Lumias and a couple non-Lumia devices, well, 3, that will be getting their updates as of today. I don't know if this list will be getting bigger in the future. If Microsoft is taking its time to prepare updates for some of the devices. Maybe it hasn't made its mind about some yet, but there's a list now. Check it out. It's got a lot of popular Lumia Windows Phone 8.1 models on there. And if you have one of these and you want to update, you have to download Microsoft's Upgrade Advisor app. It'll scan your phone, make sure it's one of the models that's eligible for the update, make sure you have enough free space, and get you on your way to installing it.
So let's chew through some of these Q&As really quickly here. Aaron Keenan writes, is it a big deal that the Galaxy S7 doesn't have USB Type-C? Doesn't seem like anyone is talking about it. And Aaron, in my experiences, quite a few people have actually been talking about it. But I don't think that USB-C is a deal breaker on the S7, as I don't know we're seeing... I mean, we're going to have to test this out with the LG G5, but I don't know that we're really seeing Android fully taking advantage of the USB-C spec yet. So on, what is it, the OnePlus 2, which has USB-C?
Yeah.
That the data transfer rates, everything is still kind of just USB 2, it's just the connector change.
And no one has USB, well, I guess some people have USB 3 now. I have a super old computer, by the way. I can't even take advantage of it. And this poor little flash drive here with a nice blue end, letting me know it could be going faster, and I can't. Yeah, but, I mean, a lot of stuff is still legacy, and the fact that not everything in your life is going to upgrade at once kind of limits the appeal of these new USB. And having to go out and get new cables, especially with all the crap we've been seeing about bad cables being wired incorrectly and frying your devices, people are hesitant. And I mean, I guess manufacturers are kind of hesitant to take this step. Samsung will get around to it, absolutely. Maybe we'll see it with a Note later this year, or maybe next year with the Galaxy S8s, but it'll happen. I wouldn't get too freaked out about it.
Well, and also, there are sort of rumors floating around that the actual hardware design of USB-C, we haven't properly vetted things like waterproofing. So even if it doesn't show up on the Note 6 this year, Samsung might, again, be focusing on one specific feature, like waterproofing, if they can't bring that to USB-C, if they can't engineer that in the very short window of time that we see, they might pass it and just say, hey, you know what, Galaxy S8, then we'll be able to figure all that stuff out.
Yeah, and when it comes down to day-to-day use cases, I think most users would side on favor of having things like water resistance than, oh, this isn't using the very latest thing. I got to remember which way to turn the cable before plugging it in. This is so 2014. You'll survive. You know?
Again, I'm like, is this ever? Oh, I can't figure out how my hands work.
Yeah.
Use my infomercial joke twice in one show, folks. That's the kind of entertainment value we bring to the
When
table.
material works, it works. What can we say?
Right? If I can bring it back again for a third, we're in like
Oh,
comedy happens in threes. So I'm very excited about that. Lastly, we have a question here from Jan Strasky. Jan asks, everybody says you should not install the Android N preview on your main phone, but do you recommend installing it on a Pixel C? Does the split screen outweigh the bugs?
Ooh, we haven't tried this yet, have we? I mean, this was our big complaint when we got the Pixel C. This is really, really nice hardware. It's well made. It looks like it should be great for like laptop-y multitasking, and I guess the software's not quite there yet, but it'll be great when Android N comes out. And now we have it. I'm curious to see how this actually works here. We still, want to wait for the full version of Android N before we pass judgment here, but yeah, I'd be really curious to see how that comes together.
This is I think, Jan, I think your strategy of, again, I always caution, I know there are plenty of people out there who don't mind being guinea pigs with their main phones, but for me, smartphones are mission critical. Like, I need to depend on this phone, being able to do what I need it to do. So I always caution, be very careful if you're installing preview builds on a phone that you need to rely on, because you don't know. Something might just go bork one day.
I always tell myself, like, when I get a new phone, oh, this is great. I can finally start flashing all these custom ROMs with my old phone. I'm going to do nightlies now. I never actually do, but I love this feeling like I don't have to rely on this guy anymore. I can finally have fun with the flashing stuff on there.
And usually by the time I cycle through my daily driver, it's so old that no one's doing
there's the other problem.
Custom ROMs on that phone anymore. But Jan, if you're not, and I hope that's Jan and not Jan. I just realized that our international audience.
Oh, 6 of 1.
Anyway, if you've got a Pixel C lying around and you don't mind, sort of throwing it to the cause of beta software, then I think that's a great strategy for testing out what you might or might not be able to do with that kind of beta software. And shoot us a question. Let us know how it goes for you installing it on the Pixel C.
And you can always roll things back to the Marshmallow on there. You're going to lose your data in the process, but data schmata. You backed it up, right? It's fine.
It's fine. It's fine. So, speaking of like apps and services and software, we have a pair of Windows Phone announcements, and we can keep these pretty short. Some sad news and some potential good news, Stephen, if you wouldn't mind talking us through the agony of losing Here Maps on Windows.
Nokia has been so good to Windows Phone over the years. It's brought in some great hardware, some good software, but it's been changing times over there and parting of the ways. And as Nokia's sort of stature in Windows Phone fades into the background, hadn't been absorbed, Microsoft absorbed its hardware here. Nokia's still been doing software here and there, but it has been selling bits off. And last year we saw the Here Maps division being sold to a conglomerate of auto manufacturers because it makes sense. You need maps for navigation purposes. It seemed like a good fit, and the software had continued being available for a while. Now it's time to read the writing on the walls. Windows Phone just isn't that popular a platform. And, here Maps being in new hands now, there's no longer this really strong inclination to make it available for Windows no matter what. So as a result, going forward, here is starting to shutter a lot of its Windows operations. The first thing that's happened is we're losing the Windows 10 app. I think that goes away by the end of the month. The Windows Phone 8.1 version will keep on working, but you're just not going to get any future updates. The Windows 10 app, even if you have it already now, is going to stop working several more months down the road. So the Windows 10 version is going away for good. Windows 8 has a slightly longer lifespan, but still it's going to be stagnant. Really, the future of Here Maps seems to be on Android and iOS in a change of events we probably wouldn't have seen coming a couple of years ago, but that's where we are now. Microsoft still uses the Here Maps data. It's licensed for its own mapping software, and it's been teasing that there's some big stuff coming in there. We don't know exactly what feature-wise, but soon something big. So it's not like the end of the world for mapping over on Windows Phone, even though this is kind of more symbolic change than anything. Move from Nokia to Microsoft, you can still get around. It's fine.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's just really interesting timing as all of these things are lining up with the Windows 10 updates going out today for previous Lumias, and that's the Windows 10 Here Maps is built on support from Windows 8 that isn't going to allow that app to function as all of these phones get updated.
Yeah, it's interesting. When the company made this announcement, it referenced certain ways that the app was delivered. Like, it wouldn't be able to keep maintaining the Windows 10 app because of some change to how the app was packaged. Yeah, that Microsoft was doing something. I know some people were snooping around to figure out what that was. I don't know anyone's come up with a really compelling answer, but this may not entirely be Here Maps' fault. Like, it might have wanted to continue with this Windows 10 release, and it can't devote the resources to keeping it going, and because something's changing that's out of its control, the current version is not going to work anymore. So
yeah, and more to your point, just how interesting it is that we saw, I think on the same day that this was announced, didn't we see an update to the iPhone version of Here Maps that so they're obviously still supporting it. I was a little worried when Here Maps got bought out that they would become a proprietary system for like in-car navigation and that we would lose access to a really
smartphone version altogether.
Platform. Exactly. But that doesn't seem to be the case. So if you're on an iPhone, I would recommend checking out Here Maps as a companion to your Apple and Google mapping affairs, because it just got updated again.
See what you're missing out on.
So that news being a little on the sad side, we did get some potential teasers, the possibility of a Windows 10 universal Spotify app.
Yeah, I am not up on this one here. Let's see what's going on. No.
Oh, so what we saw was this conversation happening online between sort of the Spotify community managers and some people that were asking questions about the state of Spotify on Windows Phone. And initially, people got shot down hard. That there was like no plans for implementing a Windows Phone version, but that for Windows 10 moving into the future, if enough people are requesting it, that could be something that they look at as a universal.
The saving grace of Windows Phone.
And so, it definitely brings up the point. We saw Twitter recently. Didn't they just yesterday or the day before put out a universal Twitter app?
They did
for Windows 10, which is long overdue, as both the desktop and the phone versions of Twitter for Windows Phone were pretty terrible. We saw Instagram finally take the wraps off their Windows 10 beta, and it's actually even gotten an update. It's gotten more updates.
Does it not crash anymore?
Oh no, it's still super laggy on
it crashes in different ways.
It's pretty bad, but we're seeing improvements, and we're already seeing more updates than I think the original Windows Phone 8
that's something
beta ever got. So that's excellent. But yeah, so do we think we're going to start seeing more traction when the appeal of delivering an app for every Windows device on the market? This has been the dream of Windows. Do we think that more developers will actually start taking advantage of this, or does Spotify look at a web browser as being the preferred method of interacting with their service on laptops, desktops, convertibles, hybrids, touchscreen Windows devices?
That's a very good question. It struck me as odd seeing how many of these things that feel like they should be web services have felt the compulsion to move to apps. A lot of the times it comes in a circle. We started using it in a browser on the desktop. When it comes to mobile browsers being the hit and miss experience that they are. It made more sense to deliver something as a packaged app. But now coming back around to the desktop, and we're getting apps through a centralized store like on Windows 10, it doesn't make more sense now to have a desktop app where it might have been a web version in the past. And with the appeal of these universal apps, so you can maintain one code base and have it accessible across form factors, I feel like it will be a growingly attractive proposition for developers here. That said, though, cross-platform wise, it might make more sense to stick to web. That way, you're addressing users, on Mac as well as Linux. And I don't know. I guess it depends where the user base lies and figuring out the best way to allocate resources.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that we see some traction moving forward, because it's also just been the frustration of using Windows 10 on my desktop and on my laptop. Especially for my laptop, I early on got a touchscreen Lenovo, and there are so many times, like, I didn't think that I would actually gravitate towards touchscreen computing like I have, but even on the laptop, there are so many times where something makes more sense from the keyboard or the trackpad, and then just instinctively I reach up and tap something on the screen. Like just some like monkey getting a treat in a lab, like boop, okay, that's good, boop. So the fact that we don't have the sort of wealth of options that we see from Android and from iOS, like iPad-style apps, has definitely been a disappointing side effect of moving through Windows 8 to Windows 10. So hopefully, I'm hoping that what we see from Spotify, if Spotify gets enough user feedback, they actually consider making a service like this, which really I think only stands to benefit the platform in the long term. It's just the development costs obviously don't look quite so attractive when they probably don't have the kind of user numbers that they're looking at opposite iPhone and Android users.
Yeah, and not that the Windows Phone user base is huge to begin with, but what we have now that the Windows 10 mobile updates are coming out, and we're going to see those existing users start transitioning over, and you can, you're not thinking about Windows Phone 8.1 and the Windows 10 desktop and mobile users as separate groups. You can just look at them as just Windows users. It becomes easier to address their needs. So hopefully more devs will be doing that.
So moving on to some slightly more political news, Apple is doubling down on cloud encryption.
Yeah, so it only makes sense.
I'm actually kind of surprised that we're talking about this now as if it's becoming such a big news topic, but obviously we're still in the middle of a number of situations where Apple is facing law enforcement requests for unlocking iPhones, but that doesn't seem to be stopping them from looking at how they might also be able to make access to cloud data more difficult for anyone trying to break into someone's cloud account.
Yeah, Apple knows what it's doing in terms of privacy, and that users really value this, and it wants to give them as many options as it can for them to secure their personal data. And so I don't think it's afraid to start changing things such that things become more difficult for law enforcement. Certainly when it started doing encryption across the board in iOS for the phones, it made things much more difficult for people trying to access the contents of phone via a warrant request. You can't just do that. There's this new technological hurdle to overcome. And in the past, Apple has been able to comply with warrants asking for iCloud backup data. Because when that data is sent from your phone to Apple's servers, yeah, it's encrypted on the servers, just so someone can't hack into Apple's computers and steal things. But it's a key that Apple has, so Apple can access that data. And this is how you then retrieve the data later on when you're moving to a device or something through your iCloud account. And so when Apple's asked to, it can and does provide that data to law enforcement officers. But now it's thinking about moving forward. It might be nice to have iCloud data that not even Apple itself can access. That is, it comes from your device. It's encrypted before being sent to Apple's servers. It comes back to you in encrypted form, and only when it finally reaches your hands again can you decrypt this data, turn it into usable form, and load it onto your device, encrypting it again in the process probably. It's not clear how Apple wants to do this, because every time you start adding more encryption to a system, usability issues start coming into consideration here. You have to enter a password. If you forget this password, you can no longer access the data. That's a problem, because users like to have some sort of... this is a backup. This is what you do when you're already in a bad situation. You're turning to restoring your iCloud stuff. If you can't get to that iCloud backup, you're going to be really frustrated. So Apple needs to find a way to balance user privacy concerns while still being able to give its users the same level of ease of access that they're used to. So what the answer is, we don't know just yet, but Apple's supposedly looking into this, and we might be seeing a future where it's a lot more difficult for law enforcement to get access to iCloud data.
And also, just again, because we're talking about timing on a lot of these stories, the timing on this really sort of positioning Apple as a champion for user privacy.
Mm-hmm.
This is definitely part of the PR that they're trying to craft around this. But then also, do we think that they're really stepping up to the plate to help explain what these systems and what these services will bring to consumers? And do we think that they're doing enough to actually help them in the sort of court of public opinion, opposite some of the talking points that we've seen from law enforcement and elected officials about how we're supposed to keep the population safe if there's a door they can't break down?
That's a very complicated question there. Just from the point of educating consumers about it, Apple, it tries its best, but this is a complicated issue. You can go now, you can pull up on Apple's site. It has a privacy breakdown of iCloud showing what gets encrypted, how it gets encrypted, if it's encrypted on your phone, if it's encrypted on the servers. And even knowing, being some technological savvy, even knowing what I do about how this works, it's not an easy read. And if you go in with the wrong assumptions here, you might think that the data on iCloud is as protected from prying eyes
Right.
as the data on your phone.
Which we've seen from numerous attacks that it is not.
Yeah, it's just not encrypted with the sort of key that would protect your data from, it's on Apple servers in an encrypted form, but that key is also over there, and it's not in a way that affords you quite the same level of protection as maybe having something fingerprint secured on your phone does.
So it's absolutely a situation, and it's something that we've brought up on this podcast in numerous times before. This is definitely something that I feel is important to discuss with family and friends who might not be quite as tech savvy. I recently flew out to Florida for my sister's wedding, and my family, knowing what I do for a living, I got a lot of questions about what the FBI was trying to compel Apple to do, and how they and it almost always kind of came back to sort of a general idea of law enforcement being able to do their job, but then everyone was very curious as to what systems they should be employing to better protect their data. And not that I know of, I don't think any of my family are terrorists or drug runners, but all of a sudden there was this sort of higher level of awareness for what is it that I'm putting out into the internet, what is it that lives on my device, and how much do I care about protecting it, and to what level can I protect it? So for anyone who's watching this show or listening to this podcast, this is one of those that I really feel we need to handle with patience. If someone asks us a question about, like how a web browser works, I think it's fair to kind of roll your eyes and be like, oh, welcome to the 21st century. But for some of these more nuanced and some of these more politically dicey situations, really want to take that breath before you delve into an explanation, and try and really work towards understanding, because this is another one of those situations where we're balancing a person's fear of what the government might have access to, and then also fear of how the government might be able to protect us from people that wish to do us ill or wish to do us harm. And it really does need to be handled with sensitivity, with patience, and with an understanding that consumers really do care about this stuff. They just don't always have the tools at their disposal to properly understand all of the nuance surrounding these issues.
It's funny you mentioned your relatives talking about their concern with government being able to get access to this data when it needs to, and at the same time being worried about what they can do to protect their own privacy. And one of Apple's responses to the government's filings here mentioned, it was describing the chain of trust with digital signatures and how this works to protect the iPhone. And it's saying, we're not just making this up to make your lives difficult. This comes from NIST recommendations on how to secure mobile devices. You told us this is how we should be protecting mobile devices. This is not something we're doing, to counter to your wishes here.
Yeah,
I learned it from you, Dad.
I learned it from watching you.
Yeah.
No, and especially coming from a military family and having done a little work with Department of Energy. Watching what Apple has done from iOS 7 to iOS 8, a lot of those changes, especially why we see the level of protection that we have now on the iPhone, were actually encouraged because the iPhone was becoming a very popular option for
Yeah.
government employees. So we needed to actually improve the protections on those phones. And so now we have to have a proper debate, an informed debate as to whether or not consumers can also have access to the highest quality protection tools afforded to a platform. And unfortunately, that debate might not come out on our side. Obviously, I side with the idea that as an individual, I should have the same access to protecting my data that anyone else does or any government agency might. But if we get into this debate and it's decided against us, then we sort of have to go with the will of the people, and that's what being in a democracy is all about. So really what we need to do stepping up over this next year, because I think this is going to be a continued discussion throughout 2016 and into 2017, is to make sure that the people who are making these decisions understand what's at play here, understand what's at stake, and that the people who vote for those elected officials that make these rules also have a pretty good handle on what's going on here, because it's going to have far-reaching ramifications for the future of mobile technology.
Just remember, folks, Trump doesn't know how to use a smartphone.
Well, he's finally backed off his Apple boycott, so we're all happy about that. I know I was really afraid for the future of Apple's financials when Trump wanted to.
Yeah, I was selling stock like crazy there. Things were dicey.
I mean, just like the plunge that that's enough. We don't have to keep going on that. So we have one last little news story, and this one, it's sort of mobile focused, but just in this world that we've created of interacting with mobile services, of new services like Uber, which depend on not having a centralized company with employees, but having independent contractors that work with your company, and how do you vet them? This one I found to be very disturbing in this individual who obviously has some issues, signing up to be an Uber driver and then doing some pretty reprehensible things.
Pretty reprehensible? That's strong language for a shooting spree here, but sure, want to go?
If you wouldn't mind maybe delving in.
We're talking about
my setup there.
Jason Dalton here, who is the Uber driver involved in. How many people are involved in the shooting here? A lot. So this is a guy who drove around in Kalamazoo, Michigan, doing his Uber route and then stopping here and there.
He shot 8 people and killed 6
at
different
shoot
locations around Michigan.
Before he picked people up while he was doing this. Someone later on came out to, this guy was being a really crazy driver then. She was lucky to get away from him without him making her a target as well. And now the guy is suing Uber because, well, he is a crazy person and claiming that the app was sending him signals to kill, had devil messages. And it's not, we know this lawsuit doesn't have any merit here, but the issue it brings up is this is a clearly disturbed individual who was connected to a lot of our lives, or he could have been to a lot of lives, in ways he might not have been just because of this app. It connected us with someone, a perfect stranger, really, who we might not have other interacted with besides we needed to get a ride that day. So we have to start thinking about services like this. And yeah, they're very convenient, but when we start bringing all these other people into our lives, what risks are we taking on as a result? What risks should the companies behind these apps be accountable for? And I'm sure the courts are going to love making those decisions as class action lawsuits starts coming from the victims' families and who knows what else.
Well, and it's also just because Uber is going to be in the headlines for so many of these stories. Uber did their due diligence like they would do for any other driver to see if this guy had a criminal record or if there were going to be any potential issues. And you can't always fully predict when someone's going to go way off the deep end like this individual did. I mean, he could have been working for a taxi service and had the same kind of complete mental breakdown leading him to this level of depravity, but
it just happens to intersect with the mobile space like it does, so this is something we're going to be talking about.
This is just such a precious topic for us right now because there are so many instances of new services being built on this notion of a sharing economy. Like that you sign up for Airbnb and you go to some stranger's house and you stay the night there. Well, the person who owns that property doesn't always know the full character of the people interacting with that service. I mean, you have reviews, but the people that are interacting with that service to stay at that place don't also know if the person who owns the property has like a torture dungeon in his basement. So as we continue to put more and more of the burden on individuals to act as independent contractors, I mean, coming back to your point, Stephen, we have to ask some very serious questions because the novelty's worn off. We now have an expectation of people driving their own cars to shuttle people around like a taxi service. This is just something that exists now. Lyft, Uber, we're familiar with it. That's how we do business. A lot of us do business now.
Mm-hmm.
So what responsibility we place on the companies that hire those individuals or work with those individuals now becomes a much more precious question to ask. And I really don't think that law enforcement and elected officials are properly informed as to how to start the conversation. You know, I worry that we're going to look at a situation like this and then say, oh, well, Uber can't guarantee our safety, so we need to either hit them with, you know, penalties or fines or more strict licensing agreements.
I'm sure there are a lot of people who feel that there should be, you know, stricter regulatory requirements on Uber. You know, not just initial vetting, you know, checking up with these guys, some sort of ongoing monitoring to make sure they're delivering the level of service they should be, with the level of safety they should be. And while that may be true, a company like Uber would not exist in the first place had it had all these regulatory hurdles to deal with. It's been a company that's asked for forgiveness rather than permission, and that allowed it to grow at the rate it has now. And so, you know, we have to choose between stifling innovation while balancing that with making sure that, you know, we go into something with all our expectations met, expectations of security, expectations of, you know, delivering the service as promised here. And where do we, you know, it's very, very difficult to say going forward, this is how we want this to work. It's easy to look back and say, this is how this should have worked. And, you know, it's not clear who should be leading this conversation. And, you know, like I said, government officials don't seem super well equipped to be making this call right now.
Just to wrap this point up, Stephen, I think one of the things that's scariest about this is the hindsight on this situation actually doesn't pan out. You know, we're looking at someone who was off the rails crazy but didn't have a criminal record. So unless we start violating HIPAA protections and privacy in medical situations, even then, I don't know that we would have gotten a good glimpse as to what this guy was all about before he signed up for Uber. So,
like, should Uber do like a private psychiatric exam for everyone? What do we want to demand of them?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think we'll probably start to encounter a few more of these situations where people can sneak by the types of protections, and you can make the requirements even stricter, but individuals will still find a way either around them or have issues once they've already passed them. And it really plays into a greater conversation which we're not prepared to tackle on things like medical access and mental health care access, and I'm going to have to let that be tackled by some other show because we're going to wrap this up. And I did get a really funny comment from the Q&A from Kyle Ruggles that Scream 10 Airbnb, which is probably not too far off. I'd be shocked if we don't see like a Hostel or a Saw-style film built around this idea of people using apps, and then evil people can kill you because of your apps, because apps and evil and
death. I'm pretty sure I've seen this film before.
We definitely have. It's just not maybe with so much of the smartphone focus. I think that's coming. I think that's going to be like the next Scream or Saw or something like that. It's pretty bad. So I'm going to say we've got some phenomenal questions here in the Q&A. We've got a lot of comparison questions, guys, which we're going to be tackling in future videos on the YouTube channel and in future articles on Pocketnow.com as we start looking at Galaxy S7s versus LG G5s. I mean, almost half of the questions that I'm looking through in this Q&A probably have some notion of which do you like better, or which do you prefer? And we will be answering those in future podcasts, but then also definitely be looking to our YouTube channel and our reviews, because we're going to be digging in pretty deep on a lot of that content as we move forward with reviews. But Jules is already prompting me to move on because we've got to tackle those listener emails. Jules, if you want to cue us up. Beautiful. So listener mail number 1 comes to us courtesy of Quadwo. I really do apologize because that's probably not how you pronounce your name.
It's how it's spelled.
It is how it's spelled for us Westerners. That is how it would be pronounced. So he says he's going to keep this question brief. The general trend nowadays with phone reviews is that flagship and mid-range phones will be good enough for the majority of people to use for between 12 and 24 months. My question is, what Android OEM provides the best after-sales care to make keeping the phone for upwards of 2 years a good experience? Steven, you're on the spot. Who has the best support leading past 18 months?
Okay, I don't have the best experience to be answering this question. My smartphone history is largely dominated by Nexus devices, where you know very well what you're going in here. 2 years, no problem. Maybe even a little more than 2 years. Now I'm on the OnePlus wagon here, and it's a little shaky, and I still don't got my Marshmallow yet. I'd really like to have it. There's no ETA. I kind of feel in the dark here. I'm sure a lot of users do. So I wouldn't recommend them just yet, but they are a new company that hasn't really established its track record yet.
Well, not even a new company. We're still waiting on Galaxy S6s.
Yeah. Samsung, again, it's hit and miss even with the big companies here. You know you're going to get the really big flagship phones should have their support for at least 2 years there, but there are so many ifs, ands, and buts there. Like, is one carrier going to become known for dragging its feet with making updates available here? With all these factors, updates becoming available from the company behind the platform, the manufacturer itself preparing them for the phones in good time, the carriers approving them, there's a lot that can go wrong there. So even with a really well-known company, HTC, or not HTC, is it Motorola? Yeah, who just isn't bringing it to the Moto X 2014 or 15? 14 isn't bringing Marshmallow to that. I'm sure that surprised a lot of people. But it's really, really hard to look at past performance and predict how that will unroll in the future. So as a result, I don't know what to recommend here exactly.
Actually, I think you nailed it right at the beginning of your speech. If what you care about is software support, bug fixes, patches, and new operating systems, I think Nexus is the way to go. And I'm not a huge fan of the Nexus lineup of phones. I really do.
There's definitely some trade-offs there, especially if you're not used to getting your phone independently of a carrier here. But you got to decide what's important to you.
And also for individual little aspects of like hardware. I mean, the Nexus 6P was a huge step up for camera performance, but I still really like what LG and Samsung do, and I really do like some of the customizations that Samsung and LG have brought to software. Things like split screening apps. We're finally getting it on Android N, but we've been playing with that for a while on Galaxies. But ultimately, if what you care about is software support, I still think going directly to Google is probably your best option. Stephen, would you mind tackling listener mail number 2?
Yeah, the condensed version here. Virag writes in. I teach at the local university and had to invigilate, that's a good word, at a couple of exams. The new guidelines have us ask all students to place their smartphones turned off on an allotted table, walk around checking for smart watches to be taken off, and accompany students to the restroom door and listen for calls and any devices that they may have hidden. Wow. Honestly, I think this is madness, and I've been wondering whether we stand a chance at all. I don't think we'll ever be able to prevent all forms of digital cheating, but I don't think gadgets can even help you that much. When you're doing something like writing an essay on Beowulf at an upcoming staff meeting, what should I say about all this? I want to protest against the charade, but I need a solid argument.
That's tough.
Is it? I don't quite get what the big upset is here. Of course you shouldn't have your phones on you during a test. You didn't have books on you on your desk during a test. You put them somewhere. You sit down with just your paper and your pencil. And, okay, the bathroom break thing's a little ridiculous here, but since when can you take bathroom breaks during a test anyway?
So what? And this question comes courtesy of Virag, who also very helpfully gave us a pronunciation on his name.
Oh, yeah, I didn't see that.
On his name.
I got it right. Sort of.
And that it might not be a him. I do apologize.
One
of the things that I think he's asking though is the tone and the quality of the enforcement being as aggressive as it is.
It's gotta be. It's so easy to get access to information through these things. You can have a small screen. You can have limited input as long as it has a cellular data connection on there.
Oh, right. And I can even remember back to when I was in high school and I had a really awesome graphing calculator that had a full QWERTY keyboard.
Yeah.
That wasn't.
You have to erase all your saved programs prior to the test.
They wouldn't allow it for the SATs because the QWERTY keyboard made it easier for me to type out the questions.
What was that, TI-93?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
TI-92. Yeah, it was. Oh, I loved that thing.
Mm.
But they were seeing that people would go in there, purposely bomb the test, but then have the entire question sheet so that other people could just sort of copy the answers and know what was going to be on the SAT. So they just banned them. So what we're seeing, Vrog, we're seeing an escalating arms race. We're seeing technology is cycling faster and faster and faster, and so unfortunately our ability to respond to it is probably just going to continue making this conversation really contentious, where between the students that you're interacting with and then the people that have to administrate these styles of tests are probably never going to see eye to eye. And unfortunately, when you
They
go and
don't
talk
have to.
oh
The
no, but what I
teachers
mean is,
are in control.
well, no, but and actually that's the main point is, unfortunately, at some point you've just got to say why because I said so.
Yeah, put your damn phone away. You're in school.
But long term, and this isn't a conversation that I think you bring up in context of how tests are administered today, but long term, I really do think we need to start having conversations about education as to what quality of information should people be expected to memorize.
Right, because being able to find answers is a valuable
Exactly.
skill in and of itself.
And so I think in how we incorporate technology in the classroom, it's not just always as a thing to write papers on it. We need to be doing a better job of instructing and testing on how people can seek out information, search information, and determine what problems need to be solved in a certain setup. And that hopefully will expand on how we incorporate technology into things like testing. But that's a multi-year situation, or
Well, I think we have a good framework for that because we started doing this already with math, where you'll teach students at a young age how to do everything by hand. Later on, we start allowing them to use calculators once we know that they know how to do the basics, and we can say, okay, you don't have to do that grunt work anymore. Here's a tool to help you. It didn't used to be the case that there was any way to easily have a machine answer questions about science, history, the arts, but now you kind of can. So at the same time, we have to think about how are we going to give students this this groundwork, and then later on say, okay, we know that you know the basics. Now show us how you can use the tools to draw from that basics and answer more complicated questions.
Yeah, and also sort of acknowledging that technology has far surpassed the TI-82 graphing calculator.
Yet they still use that. This is a monopoly. It's nuts.
It's crazy. So last question. This comes from Aniko. Hey, Aniko, what's up? The S6 is pretty much a perfect phone except battery life and TouchWiz. Okay. Which I assume have been fixed on the S7. So will we see the S7 be a perfect phone this year?
No.
Or will there never be a perfect phone? And moving on, if Samsung and others have figured out to make good all-rounders without Achilles' heels, what will be in store for us in the following years? Because it'll be boring if it's just always, oh wow, the processor and the camera have been better, et cetera, et cetera. Steven, will we ever have a perfect phone?
Well, no, we never have the perfect phone. You'll have the perfect phone for right now, I think, is what you can get. There's always going to be ways to improve. I mean, we haven't seen this big leap forward in battery tech, but we'll get there eventually. Processors may be starting to hit some cost benefit, or not cost benefit, but just size, heat, performance trade-offs that doesn't make a lot of sense to push them much further. But we can optimize what we have. We can add in features. Like now they're expanding beyond basic processing capabilities to add things like subprocessors gathering sensor data for doing low power stuff while the phone's not otherwise engaged in things. So there's all sorts of really exciting ways to expand on phone performance and feature sets that aren't just the dull, it's a little bit faster, it takes a little bit better pictures, maybe the screen's a little bit prettier this year. Right. Those are all, I don't think we should discount those either. That's just part of the way these things improve. And the fact that it's getting better in smaller ways, I don't think has to be a negative. So maybe you don't need to upgrade your phone every year. Maybe modular phones are becoming a big thing. So your screen gets scratched, you can pop on a new one. Use the same basic hardware for 5 years or so before moving on to something all new. And by then, hopefully, there would have been the improvements to make you say, "Wow, this is finally worth my while to upgrade." So it's gonna, the face of upgrades, I think, will start changing as we getting into this field where it feels like we've reached the pinnacle of smartphone design. But there's
I'll even take you one further on this, where I don't even know that we can rightfully say there's the perfect phone for right now.
For you, for whatever your need. I mean,
that's exactly what I mean.
Yeah.
Is I really feel people should start shopping their smartphones more based on what compromises they're willing to live
Oh,
with.
absolutely, yeah.
And so when we look at all of the features that we get really excited about, for me personally, I'm a camera snob. I love high quality audio. So I focus most on those, and I have to weigh, like, do I prefer the camera on one phone more than I prefer the headphone jack on another? That's always been sort of the debate between HTC, LG, and Samsung.
There are different quality headphone jacks? Oh my god.
Dude.
I have not been asking the right questions, clearly.
We've got amps, we've got DACs. I mean,
but the jacks.
we can go down that rabbit hole.
I want banana plug output on my next phone.
And so, especially, Heniko, when we're looking at something like, the sort of the general, the common knowledge being that, the Apple Samsung debate is going to rule most tech conversations for people because they're the top two. We really want to start delving into just that little bit of extra nuance so that you can make an informed purchasing decision for yourself. And then it kind of doesn't matter what someone like me might say about a specific phone. Like, if I say, well, phone XYZ is my absolute favorite and it does this and it does that and that's great, and none of those things apply to you, well, then why would you buy that phone?
Right.
And so really that's what we want to make sure that we're focused on above all else, especially in that the people watching the show, the people on the show, are the ones who also make those recommendations for other people. I personally, I'm not a huge fan of the iPhone. It doesn't do it for me. But I have sold so many of those things for Apple, for family and friends, where that's the right tool for the job. That was the appropriate phone for the person who came to me asking for help on which device to get. And so that's really where I think we need to make sure that we're staying, as fair as we can be with all of our individual personal biases.
Sure.
So, folks, that was a lot of talking. I think we can push the button on this one. I think we're wrapped up.
We should have like one or more Google Hangouts failures before we really call things a day.
We probably should. Let me. I'll call Google right now and
I'll go pour some salt water on the server, see if that does anything.
Well, folks, another episode of the Pocketnow Weekly has come and gone, but the conversation continues on Twitter, where you can find Stephen Shank as @StephenShank. Jules Wong is @PointJules, and I'm humbly @SomeGadgetGuy. Pocketnow is around the web on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Google+, YouTube, and our home site, pocketnow.com. It all comes together like a really tasty pizza full of all of your favorite ingredients and then baked to the perfect temperature. Shows like this can't exist without your support. Sharing the weekly with your friends who love mobile technology, and by dropping some reviews on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever podcast reviews can be left. And if you're watching this on the YouTubes, hit that thumbs up for a little extra positive reinforcement. You can write to us directly for a chance to have your questions answered live on the air using the email podcast@pocketnow.com. And major thanks to our sponsor, Benjamin. BenjaminApp.co/PocketNow. Really cool deals for all of the listeners for the show. They're helping us keep the lights on. But ultimately, we wouldn't be here if it weren't for our listeners and subscribers who have kept us on the air since 2012. The Pocketnow Weekly will be back next week with all kinds of delicious technology goodness. So make sure you check back in.